Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I am doing a review of Ursula K. Le Guin's The Lathe of Heaven. This is part of my sci-fi classic series where I review classic sci-fi novels, provide some of the historical context for the novel, the time that it was written, add some complementary titles, and then obviously just chat through the book itself. This is a personal project for me because I feel like I am somewhat lacking in my sci-fi reading. I have not read as widely in sci-fi as fantasy, and I'm having a great time actually so far. The 3 books that I have done, so I did The Chrysalids by John Wyndham, and then I did Hyperion by Dan Simmons, and now The Lathe of Heaven have all been super enjoyable. So this book, for anyone who doesn't know, is one of Ursula K. Le Guin's works, standalone works of sci-fi, and it is basically about a man who discovers that he can control the future of the world with his dreams. And like I said, in these reviews, I like to provide a little bit of the history, the historical piece of the book when it was published. So this is a work of sci-fi that was published in 1971 by Ursula K. Le Guin, and it did really well upon release. So it was nominated, I believe, for the Nebula, and it was nominated for the Nebula, nominated for the Hugo, and won the Locus Award for Best Novel. So it was critically acclaimed when it came out. Ursula K. Le Guin had obviously built up a following and built up a reputation in the sci-fi fantasy community, but this one was really well received. Like I said, it was published at the beginning of the 1970s, so some of the other really well-known works of sci-fi that have been published around the same time include the books like Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, which had come out at the end of the 1960s. Then we had Flowers for Algernon, which had been a short story earlier, but the novelization of that story was published also in the late 60s. And we had other works by Ursula K. Le Guin herself. And for many people, so some of the literary critics who read this work had extrapolated, I guess, based on the content and the way that the book was written, that this was Ursula K. Le Guin's nod to Philip K. Dick. So even though a lot of Philip K. Dick's books were written a little bit before The Lathe of Heaven came out, many people thought that this was kind of an homage to him. And funnily enough, one of the friends that I was reading this book with, very early on in his read, was like, Ursula K. Le Guin must be a Philip K. Dick fan. And then when we had finished reading, we both read like on the Wikipedia page that had in fact been true. But just to set like a little bit of a historical snapshot for you, at the end of the 1970s, we obviously had, like, socially in North America or in Western culture, we had the rise of this kind of anti-establishment, anti-war sentiment. We were headed into, or had been at the beginning of the years of that kind of like hippie mindset against the institution, against the man. We were riding off the end of the, major conflicts of the world. There had been in World War II, especially a lot of conflicts surrounding eugenics, and it was being acknowledged finally that these were very bad ways of thinking, and people, like, the popular opinion had been that we were hopefully leaving behind an age where the government tried to control people, and we were kind of entering more into a time when people had more control over their destiny and what they wanted, and they could influence change at a societal level. I'm not saying that we have reached that point as of right now, but that's certainly where the thinking was moving and how the world was changing. We also, medically at this time, it had been an age where the use of certain medications, like certain, especially psychedelic medications, was legal in certain medical practices. And obviously you had a rise of people who were experimenting with these kinds of substances as well. So I think just in general, if you think of that period of time, there was a lot of speculation about the brain, how the brain could be manipulated, how we could influence our brain, how we could alter reality for ourselves and create something that felt more relaxed and more peaceful. And as always with science fiction, I think the major works that come out are often reflections of the time. They can be responses to the time and maybe a vision of what the future might look like based on the major sociological changes that are happening at the time. And at least in my opinion, The Lathe of Heaven is an ideas book. It is certainly a response by Ursula K. Le Guin to some of the changes she had seen in the world, some of the major talking points of the time, a lot of the political ideologies and ideas, and the ramifications of some of the major world events that had been happening. So I think that much more so than works of fantasy, science fiction can serve as that reflective mirror. All fiction can serve as that reflective mirror, but I think that sci-fi often leans into that really heavily and will prioritize some of those ideas over things like plot and character development. And that's what makes reading sci-fi, and especially classic sci-fi, such a rich endeavor, is that you get to learn more about the world, you get to learn more about the people that lived in it and the way that they lived when you explore these kinds of stories. So that is the world that The Lathe of Heaven came to existence in, and I think that that tells us a lot about where Ursula K. Le Guin was when she wrote this, and maybe some of the things that she wanted to accomplish as she penned the novel. But just to break it down a little bit, as I said earlier, this book is about a man who has the ability to control reality with his dreams. The main character's name is George Orr, which some people have speculated could be a nod to George Orwell, who is obviously the author of the very popular dystopian fiction 1984. Other people have speculated that it could be a play on either or, because the idea of choice and determinism versus free will comes up a lot in this story. So there, lots of inspiration could have been pulled in to make this kind of everyday man. But we have George Orr. At the beginning of the story, he is pulled in by the police for misusing drugs. This is a society in which people's consumption is very highly monitored. It kind of starts off feeling a little dystopian or a little post-apocalyptic. We know that the world has been through a variety of climate changes and that people do live in a highly monitored state. People have an allocation of the drugs that they're allowed to use, and careful notes are taken about how and when they use them. And George Orr is flagged for overusing a certain type of prescription medication. And what we come to find out when he is apprehended is that he has been using these drugs not to get high, not to escape reality, but actually to cement reality, because he has this fear that he can change the world, he can change the very fabric of reality through what he calls effective dreaming. So when he falls into a very deep sleep, his dreams have the ability to change the world around him. So he's taking medications to either prevent him from sleeping altogether or to prevent him from reaching that really low level of sleep, that very deep sleep that will cause him to lose all control over his consciousness and just be at the whims of his dreams. And for anybody who's ever had a dream, you know that the kinds of things that come up there can be very disturbing and very frightening. So he is mandated to treatment by a psychiatrist who's also a sleep researcher. So he gets sent to this psychiatrist and tells him what he believes is happening. And as the story progresses, we get the idea, and George also gets the idea, that this psychiatrist is manipulating him or using him to create a world in his image. And so then we get this story where we are trying to see what changes may or may not have been made, how George feels about the changes that have taken place in the world. And the ultimate question that we have to ask ourselves, and that George is asking himself throughout this book, is that should one person get to decide the fate of everyone? And can someone who is manipulating people at such a large scale, can they be doing good? So it kind of brings us into that utilitarian philosophy where does the end justify the means? Like if you have changed reality for so many people, but ultimately humanity seems to be in a better place, is that justifiable? Is that good? Is that moral? There's lots of things to be asked through this. I talked a little bit about, when I was giving some of that historical context, I talked a little bit about World War II and eugenics and that kind of monitoring from the state and changing or molding humanity to fit what you believe is the ideal person. And there's a lot explored about this through the novel as well. Ursula K. Le Guin tackles some really complex topics in interesting ways. And although I knew ostensibly what this book was about, like given that I had that very same brief synopsis that I just gave, which was, man who can change dreams, someone wants him to change them in a certain way, I wasn't prepared for how that was going to play out. And I really didn't know what kind of direction the book was going to go in. And I really enjoyed what Ursula K. Le Guin did. I'm not going to give any details about how this plays out or the way in which some of those changes happen. I will just say that it's interesting and unexpected. There were some things that happened in this book that I really could not have predicted, and I think in a positive way. Even though, like I said, this doesn't focus a lot on character development, we really only have 3 characters that we follow. So we have our main character, George, we have his psychiatrist, and then we have a woman that he interacts with throughout the novel. And that's all I'll really say about her as well. But those are really the only 3 characters that we see a lot from. We get to hear about some other people kind of tangentially. But even for George and his psychiatrist and this unnamed, as of right now, character, the story is not about their development as people. They serve a function. They serve a narrative function in the story. They serve a thematic function, and their actions and reactions help reflect the points that Ursula K. Le Guin was trying to make. So I think more than focusing on character development, this is really just Le Guin's way of exploring the topic that she presented. And I think that it's really well done. I, most of the time want to read a very character-driven novel. This is not something that I would always want. But in these works of classic sci-fi, I think that characters as devices to either move forward the plot or move forward the thematic, the underlying themes that the author wants to convey, I think that works really well. It's just that you need to know that that's what you're getting going into things. This is a very slim volume. Like you could tell when I held it up. I think it's 180 something pages. Not even. Oh no, that's not the end. It is 180 something. 184 pages in my edition. So Ursula K. Le Guin manages to discuss a lot in such a slim volume of fiction. The style it fits really well with the story that she's trying to tell. The prose is economical, it is sparse, but it's beautiful. There are some really lovely passages. When we were reading it as a group, there were a couple of people who picked out passages and threw them up in like the favorite quotations thread that I have in Discord, because there are some passages that really do resonate. And the style itself has a very like hazy kind of dreamlike quality. If you've ever read The Man Who Was Thursday by, what's his name? Chesterton, I think. It's one of the books that inspired Neil Gaiman. It has that very similar kind of soupy, like dreamlike quality where you feel like you're almost floating through the book and you're not sure what's happening or what way that it's happening. It was reminiscent of that same style. This is probably a little bit clearer than that, but I still think that you get pulled into that trance-like, almost dreamlike state when you're reading it. And it works really well, I think, for a number of reasons. It is short, and I think that a book like this, where you're exploring one very specific idea, keeping things concise and short really helps move the story forward, especially when character development is not a major thing that you're going for, because I think things could get repetitive or they could get overused quite quickly, but that does not happen here. I think that Le Guin makes her point, she kind of charges straight at it, and the result is very enjoyable. I really, really like this one overall. I think that it's a really easy work of classic sci-fi to put on your TBR. It's short, it gives you a lot to think about, it's excellent for reading in a group, and it just promotes a lot of discussion, and I think it would promote a lot of reflection in terms of, like, if you're reading it by yourself, there is a lot to think on. I was personally interested because I am a psychiatrist. One of my best friends is a sleep psychiatrist. So I'm going to try to get him to read it as well, because I think that he will find it fascinating. But those greater moral questions, those greater philosophical questions, they impact everyone, regardless of what you do or who you are. And I think that this is a pretty universal story. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I really appreciated what Le Guin was going for here. I thought that it was an excellent length. I thought the prose fit the story very well. and I would happily read more of Le Guin's sci-fi. So that's it. I give this a wholehearted recommendation. If you read it, please let me know what you think. If you have read it before, I would love to hear your thoughts down below. And if there's any other classic works of sci-fi that you would like to see get the same treatment, the same sort of review as this one, then please leave them below. I have my own running TBR, and I'm hoping to get to at least one a month, but we will see how that goes. But thank you for watching, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye!